torches burn low in the crypts of Winterfell. The kings of winter stand silent in their alcoves, stone eyes open, stone hands resting on stone swords, watching without judgment as the living conduct their most desperate business in the presence of the dead. It is here, in this cold and ancient dark, that the course of an entire kingdom turns, not on a battlefield, not in a throne room, but in a vault carved from the bones of the North itself, where two old friends face each other across a truth too large for the world above to contain. Robert Baratheon is not a careful man. He has never been a careful man. He is appetite and impulse made flesh, a warhammer given a crown and told to reign. And yet tonight, something in him is different. The wine is still on his breath, the tears still cutting through the grime on his broad cheeks. But behind the red eyes, there is a mind that has, for once, decided to think. He has come down here to think. He has come down here because the dead ask nothing of him. He knows about Cersei. He has known for some time. Not the full shape of it, not every detail, but the essential truth that the golden children in his halls share nothing of his blood, that the dynasty he has nursed and suffered for is a fiction stitched together by a woman who despises him, dressed in the colors of his house. He does not say all of this gracefully. He says it the way Robert Baratheon says everything, too loudly, with his whole body, leaning into Ned Stark like a man leaning into a storm. But the words land. They land with the weight of stones dropped into still water. And Ned Stark, who has carried his own stone for 14 years, feels the ripples reach him. He does not answer immediately. A man like Ned Stark does not answer immediately on a question like this. He measures the moment. He measures Robert. He measures the risk against the risk already present, and he understands with the clarity that only comes when all other doors have closed. That silence is no longer protection. Robert already knows half the truth. Half the truth handed to a king in this state is more dangerous than none at all. So Ned speaks. He speaks carefully. He speaks the way a man lays down a blade, slowly, so that everyone can see it is not a threat. Lyanna's name fills the cold air between them. Rhaegar's name follows it, and that name is harder. That name costs something to say aloud in the company of Robert Baratheon, who loved Lyanna Stark with every violent, uncomplicated corner of his soul. There is a moment, a long suspended moment, where the torches seem to hold their breath. Robert does not roar. That is the thing that matters most. Robert Baratheon, who has always roared, does not roar. He goes very still. He looks at Ned with something shifting behind his eyes, some tectonic rearrangement happening deep in the man, and the silence between them is the sound of a king beginning to understand that the world is a different shape than he thought. The boy, Jon Snow, not Ned's bastard, not some shadow on the family name. The son of Lyanna Stark and Rhaegar Targaryen, born in a tower at the edge of the world, delivered into the arms of a man sworn to protect him at any cost. The blood of the dragon, the blood of the North, two great lines converging in a single boy who has spent his entire life being told he is no one. Robert laughs. It is not a happy sound, but it is not a cruel one either. It is the laugh of a man who has just been handed an answer he did not know he was asking for. He stands, he paces. The Stone Kings watch him pace, and the calculation that was never supposed to live inside Robert Baratheon begins to work. Cersei's children will not sit the Iron Throne. He has decided this in the private dark of himself. Decided it without knowing what came next, without having a next. Now there is a next. Now there is something that his mind, blunt and instinctive as it is, can grip. A boy with the blood of 2 dynasties, a boy raised by the most honorable man in the 7 kingdoms, a boy who is, by the laws of gods and men, nobody, which means he can be made into somebody, and the making of it will be entirely Robert's to control. He calls for Maester Luwin. He calls for 2 men of the Night's Watch who travel with him, men whose sworn neutrality makes them witnesses no one can easily dismiss. Ned tries to speak. Robert raises one hand, and the gesture is so uncharacteristically quiet that it stops Ned cold. What comes next is not a conversation, it is a declaration. Robert Baratheon, first of his name, King of the Andals and the First Men, Lord of the 7 Kingdoms, speaks aloud, and before witnesses, that Jon Snow, bastard of Winterfell, bastard of no one, shall be recognized by royal decree as his chosen heir, not by blood, but by the will of a king who is done pretending. Maester Luwin's hand trembles as he reaches for parchment. Ned Stark stares at the man he has known since boyhood and does not recognize him. And somewhere above them, asleep in the towers of Winterfell, the boy in question dreams of nothing, knowing none of it yet. They wake him before dawn. There's no ceremony in it, no softening of the edges. 2 household guards, whose faces he knows, whose names he has known since boyhood, appear at his door and speak in the flat, careful tones of men who have been given orders they do not fully understand. Jon dresses in the dark. He follows them through corridors that feel different in the deep hours before first light. Corridors that have belonged to him all his life, and yet seem tonight to belong to something else entirely, some graver version of the world he has always inhabited. Robert Baratheon is waiting for him in the solar, and Ned Stark is standing to the left of the king. And what Jon reads in his father's face, in the face of the man he has always called father, is the particular stillness of a man who has already wept and is now past it. It is a devastating thing to witness in a man like Eddard Stark. It tells Jon, before a single word is spoken, that whatever comes next will be permanent. Robert speaks without preamble, because Robert has never been a man who finds virtue in delay. He lays it out the way a commander lays out ground before a battle, plainly, without decoration, naming every feature that matters. Lyanna Stark, Rhaegar Targaryen, a tower in Dorne, a secret kept for 14 years at the cost of everything Ned Stark held dear beyond the safety of the boy himself. Jon Snow is not Ned Stark's son. Jon Snow is not a bastard by any law that matters. Jon Snow is the last scion of 2 houses the realm tore itself apart over, and he is standing in a cold room in the gray pre-dawn, and he is 17 years old, and the world is reorganizing itself around him with no concern at all for whether he is ready. He does not speak for a long moment. He does not have words. What he has instead is the sensation of the floor shifting beneath him, not violently, but with the slow and certain movement of something that has always been false, finally settling into what it truly is. He looks at Ned. Ned holds his gaze. He does not look away, and he does not apologize. And Jon understands, in the particular way that only those who love someone well can understand, that the lack of apology is itself the deepest expression of respect Ned knows how to offer. To apologize would be to suggest the deception was something other than survival. It was survival. It was love shaped into a lie and held there for 14 years, and now the shape of it is changing, and nothing about that is simple. The fury comes as it must. It moves through him like weather, and he does not perform it, and he does not suppress it. He stands inside it for a moment with the quiet discipline of a young man who has spent his entire life learning to master what he feels before he shows it, because bastards do not have the luxury of visible grief. Bastards learn early that their feelings are an inconvenience to everyone around them, and then, with a slowness that costs him something real, he sets it down. Not gone, set down. There is a difference, and Jon Snow knows the difference. What remains beneath the fury is the question he cannot stop asking, the one that rises louder than all the rest. He looks at Robert, at the broad weathered face of a man built from war and grief and stubbornness, and he asks it aloud, because it is the only question that matters. Why? Why would the man who hated Rhaegar Targaryen, with every breath in his body, place the realm in Rhaegar's son's hands? Robert's answer is not what Jon expects. It is not generous, and it is not tender, and it contains no pretense of affection. Robert tells him that this is not about him, that this has never been about him, that a king who cannot control his succession is a king who has already lost his kingdom, and the children of Cersei Lannister are weapons pointed at everything Robert built with 20 years of war. Jon is a correction. Jon is a move on a board that has been mismanaged for too long. Robert does not say he loves him. Robert does not say he is sorry. But he holds Jon's gaze with the unwavering directness of a man who is, for perhaps the first time in years, entirely certain of what he is doing. And there is a terrible, strange honesty in that certainty that Jon cannot dismiss. If you're enjoying this alternate history of Westeros so far, please consider subscribing because I upload new stories every single day. Now let's continue with the story. It is Ned who speaks last, and it is Ned whose words carry the weight that tips the scale. He does not command. He does not plead. He says only that the choice belongs to Jon, as it has always belonged to him. And that refusal is a choice with its own consequences. And those consequences have faces Jon knows. The people of Winterfell, his brothers, everyone he has ever loved arranged behind him in a line that leads directly into the path of Cersei Lannister's ambition if he steps aside. Jon accepts. He speaks the words of the oath with a voice that does not waver, because wavering is not something he can afford now, and perhaps will never be able to afford again. The king nods. Ned closes his eyes briefly, the way a man closes his eyes when he is bracing for something. By the time the gray light begins at the window, Maester Luwin is already preparing the orders for the journey south. And in a chamber 2 floors above, a woman whose loyalty has long since been purchased leans over a candle and begins to write. The letter arrives in King's Landing before Robert's herald does. This is not an accident. The woman who wrote by candlelight in a chamber above Maester Luwin understood one thing above all others, that in the game of power, the second to know is already losing. Cersei Lannister holds the parchment for a long moment before she sets it down, and then she does not speak, and her silence is a more dangerous thing than most men's armies. She summons them before the sun has fully risen. Jaime comes first, because Jaime always comes first. Littlefinger arrives with the careful promptness of a man who has been awake already, calculating. Varys drifts in like smoke, present but not quite solid, occupying the chamber the way a shadow occupies a doorway, belonging to neither side of it. Cersei looks at each of them in turn, and then speaks the way she always speaks when she has already decided the answer and requires only the participation of others in reaching it. Robert has named the bastard his heir. This is the fact. The fact is unacceptable. The fact must therefore be unmade. Jaime moves first, not toward agreement, but toward caution. He knows his sister the way a man knows a fire he has stood too close to for too long. Beautifully, and with scars. He tells her that Ned Stark still breathes. He tells her that the North is not a kingdom that forgets, and not a kingdom that forgives. Kill the boy openly, he says, and you hand every lord above the neck a reason to march. The Stark name is old. The Stark grief is older. Patient men with long memories are the ones who win the wars that no one sees coming until they are already lost. Jaime does not finish the full argument. He does not need to. Cersei's eyes tell him she has heard it, weighed it, and resented it for being correct. Littlefinger says nothing yet. This is itself a kind of speech. Varys offers condolences, smooth, regretful, impeccably sincere, and volunteers information about the northern roads, the timing of ravens, the disposition of certain minor lords whose loyalties are theoretical at best. What he does not offer is himself. He is present in the room and absent from its purpose simultaneously, and everyone understands this, and no one says it aloud, because naming Varys's neutrality would require acknowledging that they cannot compel him, and that acknowledgement is a door none of them wish to open. It is only when Cersei turns to Littlefinger with the full weight of her expectation that the master of coin finally speaks. He speaks softly, the way a man speaks when he wants his words to feel like gifts rather than transactions. He says that Joffrey's position need not be surrendered simply because a scroll has been sealed and witnessed. He says that scrolls can be questioned, witnesses can be managed. He says that he is her servant in this matter, as he has always been, and that she should not trouble herself with the particulars, only the outcome. Cersei receives this the way a woman receives a vow, not quite believing it, but choosing to, because belief is sometimes more useful than accuracy. What Littlefinger does not say is that he has already written a separate letter. The ink is dry. The seal is already cooling. It is addressed to the Eyrie, to a woman whose grief and fear and worship of Pater Baelish have made her a lever he can move the world with. Lysa Arryn will receive his words and read into them everything he intends her to read, and perhaps a few things he does not. And the veil of Arryn will begin to quietly, patiently coil. A war of succession is not a disaster to Littlefinger. A war of succession is an architecture project. He is the only man in the room who sees it this way, and the gap between his understanding and everyone else's is the gap he will use to climb. Jaime watches him. Jaime has never trusted Baelish the way some men distrust him openly and obviously. He trusts him the way you trust a blade you know is pointed at you, with constant attention and no sentiment. He files away the quality of Littlefinger's smile for later consideration. Cersei does not file it away. Cersei is not thinking about Littlefinger's interior. She is thinking about a boy she has never met, a boy with gray eyes and a northern name, a boy who carries the blood of Eddard Stark and the decree of Robert Baratheon, and who is currently somewhere north of the neck-breathing air that she cannot yet poison. This is the thing she cannot tolerate. Distance. The boy exists in a space she cannot yet reach, and every hour that passes is another hour in which Robert's decree solidifies, in which lords read it and accept it and begin to arrange their allegiances accordingly. She tells them the meeting is over. She tells them what she requires from each of them in terms that are specific and leave no room for interpretation. Varys is told nothing because Cersei has understood something about Varys that even Jaime occasionally forgets. That telling him something is the same as telling everyone. When they leave, she stands at the window for a long time. Below, the city moves and breathes, unaware. She thinks about the boy. She thinks about patience, which Jaime counsels and which she resents. She thinks about what it means to be patient when the object of your patience is already moving southward through the cold, already crossing the distance that separates her from him. A knock at the door. Her handmaiden enters bearing a sealed letter, not from Winterfell, from someone else, someone whose name on the outside of the parchment makes Cersei's expression shift in a way that even Jaime, standing just behind her, cannot fully read. The road south unrolls beneath them like a sentence being written in real time, each mile adding weight to the word that Robert Baratheon has already spoken. The King's Road stretches through frost-hardened earth, through stands of birch gone pale as bone, through the gray middle distance where the north slowly releases its grip and the air begins, almost imperceptibly, to soften. Jon rides near the front of the column, close enough to the king that the other riders take notice. That proximity is itself a message. Robert intends it to be read. He does not begin gently. Robert Baratheon has never done anything gently in his life, and he does not propose to start now with a boy who, in his estimation, needs hardening more than comfort. He speaks as they ride, his voice low enough that it carries only to Jon, and what he says is not the kind of counsel that flatters. He talks about the great lords the way a man talks about dangerous animals he has learned to coexist with respect, with wariness, without illusion. The Tyrells smile, and the Tyrells give, and every gift from Highgarden comes with a thread attached. The Arryns are retreating into themselves, high in their mountains, and a lord who withdraws from the board is not neutral. He is accumulating. The Martells remember everything. That one he repeats. The Martells remember everything, and they are patient in a way that Robert admires, even as it unsettles him, because patience in a man with a grievance is not peace. It is the drawing back of a bowstring. Jon listens. He asks questions that are sometimes naive and sometimes not, and Robert answers them all with the same blunt honesty, occasionally correcting the question itself before answering it, which is its own form of teaching. The crown's debts he explains without embarrassment, because shame about facts is a luxury that kings cannot afford. The numbers are significant. The numbers are, in certain lights, alarming. The Lannisters hold more of that debt than any other house, which means the Lannisters hold something that functions in practice, like leverage. He does not finish the sentence. He does not need to. Jon finishes it himself, silently, his eyes steady on the road ahead, and Robert watches him do it and says nothing, which is its own form of approval. What passes between them on that road is not warmth exactly. It is something older and more durable than warmth. It is the transmission of knowledge from one set of hands to another, the passing of a weight that Robert has carried alone for too long, and that he is now, with deliberate ceremony, beginning to share. Jon feels it settle on him. He does not resist it. He absorbs it the way Winterfell's stone absorbs cold, fully without complaint, storing it somewhere deep. The night camps are orderly and large, the royal party stretched across the ground in a formation that speaks of practice and protocol. Fires in their proper places, guards in their rotations, the sounds of a traveling court, low voices, the movement of horses, the clank of cookware from somewhere distant in the dark. Jon's tent is modest by the standards of the column, and he prefers it that way, which is something the king has also noticed. Arya finds him past the second hour of darkness. She moves the way she always moves, as though the space between things was made for her specifically, as though doors and tent flaps are merely suggestions. She sits across from him without preamble, ghost a white shadow at her side, and she does not circle what she means to say. She tells him not to forget. She says it plainly, and she says it completely, the way Arya always says things that matter, without decoration, without softening, without the courtly indirection that she has always found obscene. Ghost presses his great pale head against Jon's hand, and Arya watches this happen and points at it as though it is evidence. Whatever they put on him, whatever they call him, whatever hall he wakes in. Ghost knows. Ghost has always known. And Ghost does not care about thrones. Jon promises. He means it the way one only means something when it is extracted in the dark by someone who sees through every constructed version of oneself, down to the original. He means it with his whole chest. Arya nods once, which from her is the equivalent of an embrace, and then she is gone, and Ghost remains, and Jon sits for a long time after that, with his hand resting on the direwolf's neck. The attempt comes 2 days later, near the Crossroads Inn, where the road narrows between an embankment and a stand of old oak that crowds close to the verge. The man is not a soldier. He is something more specific than a soldier, a craftsman of a particular kind, someone who has practiced the removal of obstacles with the quiet discipline of a tradesman. He is good. He is simply not as good as a boy raised in Winterfell's yard by a master-at-arms who believed that excellence was non-negotiable and that the sword did not care about your bloodline. It is over in moments, clean, efficient, without theater. The man is dead, and Jon is standing above him, breathing evenly, and Robert is watching from horseback with an expression that is difficult to categorize. Pride compressed beneath necessity, satisfaction held rigidly behind a king's careful blankness. The gold coin in the dead man's purse is Lannister minted. New. The lion on its face is sharp enough that the stamp cannot be more than a few months old. Robert dismounts slowly. He does not touch the coin. He looks at it for a long time where it lies in Jon's open palm. And then he looks at the inn ahead, at the road behind, at the tree line on either side. The city receives him before the gates do. Word travels faster than horses along the King's Road, faster than ravens, faster than anything except the particular hunger of people who have been waiting for something to believe in without knowing they were waiting at all. By the time the procession enters the city proper, the streets of King's Landing are thick with small folk, pressed shoulder to shoulder against the buildings, straining forward, craning to see the boy who rides beside the king. They do not know him. They know only that he is young and that he is not Joffrey, and in a city that has spent years quietly absorbing the cruelties of a golden-haired prince, that alone is enough to generate something resembling hope. Jon rides straight. He does not perform for the crowd. He does not wave with calculated warmth or arrange his expression into the practiced openness of a man who has been taught to want to be loved. He simply looks at the city, the real city, not the gilded surface of it, but the narrow streets behind the main road, the faces pressed between gaps in the crowd, the children lifted onto shoulders so they can see above the heads of adults. And the city somehow feels this quality of attention and responds to it. The cheering is genuine. That is the remarkable thing. It is not the orchestrated noise of a court performance. It is the unsteady, hopeful sound of people who are not entirely sure what they are cheering for, but feel, somewhere below articulation, that something has shifted. The nobility does not cheer. The nobility stands in calculated arrangements along the formal approach to the Red Keep. Lords and ladies, draped in their house colors, with the particular stillness of people whose expressions have been managed into neutrality through long practice. The Lannister-affiliated houses arrange themselves at the fore, and their neutrality has an edge to it, a coldness that is not quite hostility, only because hostility would be politically premature. They watch Jon pass with eyes that are already calculating, already measuring this new variable against their existing arrangements, already asking the question that powerful people always ask when the succession changes. Where does this leave me? Cersei watches from height, from a window above the approach. She does not descend to the street. The choice is noted. The feast that evening is a document of allegiances written in seating arrangements and silence. The great hall of the Red Keep is dressed in the colors of both stag and direwolf. Robert's directive, carried out with the mechanical compliance of a household staff that has learned not to have opinions. The combination is improbable and not entirely graceful, but it is there, and its presence says something that careful observers do not miss. The king has committed. The symbolism is public. Reversing it becomes correspondingly more difficult with every hour it remains in place. Joffrey arrives to the feast already coiled. He is pale in the way that particular kind of anger produces. Not the flush of hot temper, but the bloodless pallor of a rage that has been compressing for days inside someone who has not yet found a safe release. He looks at Jon across the hall, and the calculation is visible in him. The specific calculation of a boy who has spent his life learning that cruelty is a form of power, and who has not yet understood that power has prerequisites. He does not wait long. Before the first courses have been properly cleared, in a silence that falls at one of those natural conversational pauses that large feasts occasionally produce, Joffrey's voice carries across the table with the practiced projection of someone who has always expected rooms to organize themselves around his words. He calls Jon a bastard. He uses the word with precision, emphasizing it in a way that is meant to land like a blade in front of witnesses. He uses the phrase wolf in a lion's house with the self-satisfaction of someone who believes he has made an argument rather than an insult. The hall goes quiet in the way that only happens when something irrevocable has been said in public. Jon does not respond immediately. He lets the silence exist. This is itself a kind of answer. The refusal to be rushed, the demonstration that the words have not destabilized him, that he is under no pressure to defend himself because he does not experience the attack as a wound requiring treatment. When he speaks, his voice is even. He says that he does not come to King's Landing for Joffrey's throne. He says he comes for the realm's safety. He says this as though it is simply information, as though he is clarifying a logistical matter, as though the insult was a misunderstanding about facts rather than a calculated humiliation. He does not look away from Joffrey while he says it. He does not look at him with anger or contempt. He looks at him the way a man looks at weather, noting it, accounting for it, moving on. Sir Barristan Selmy, who has said nothing all evening, sets down his cup with a quiet deliberateness that in the silence sounds enormous. Renly Baratheon, 2 seats away, is smiling before he remembers not to. Robert watches all of this from the head of the table with that same compressed expression Jon has seen on the road. The king who is trying to remember what it felt like to be a man with something worth protecting. He reaches for his wine and then, slowly, with the deliberate quality of a choice being made in real time, he sets it back down untouched. Ned Stark, seated now at the king's right hand in the formal placement of the hand of the king, observes Joffrey's face after Jon finishes speaking. What he sees there is not the chastened withdrawal of a boy who is lost in exchange. What he sees is the specific expression of someone who has decided that patience is now required, who has not surrendered, but only recalculated. It is the expression of a problem that has not been resolved, only deferred. The problem deferred becomes the problem deepened. That is the first truth of the game as it is played in King's Landing. And Ned Stark, who spent the better part of his life in the clean silences of the North, is learning it now with the cold efficiency of a man who understands that slowness is no longer something he can afford. He goes to Pycelle first, because Pycelle is the kind of man who keeps records the way some men keep weapons, carefully, extensively, in places they believe no one else will think to look. The Grand Maester has served 4 kings and survived each transition not through loyalty, but through the particular genius of knowing which details to preserve and which to surrender. What Ned finds in those records, cross-referenced against the notes Jon Arryn carried in his final months, is a pattern so deliberate, it reads less like evidence of a crime than like a signature. The names of bastards, the names of trueborn children, the colors of their hair. Jon Arryn had been mapping something, tracing a bloodline the way a cartographer traces a river, following it not to its mouth, but to its source, to the place where it becomes clear what the water has always been carrying. Sir Hugh of the Vale is a younger man, newly knighted, still wearing the discomfort of recent elevation like a coat that does not quite fit. He meets with Ned on the pretense of a courtesy call, and he is nervous in the way that men are nervous when they know something they have not yet decided whether to say. Ned does not press him hard. He does not need to. He simply creates the space of a question and waits. And Sir Hugh, who carries the specific guilt of a man who believes he failed a mentor, fills it. Lord Arryn had asked questions about succession, about legitimacy, about what it would mean legally and practically if the king's proclaimed heirs were not the king's heirs at all. He had asked these questions quietly, in the manner of a man assembling a puzzle rather than building a case, and then he had grown suddenly, violently ill, and then he had died. The sequence is not ambiguous. It never was. The Godswood at night is a different country. There are no torches here, only the pale weight of moonlight filtering through leaves so old they seem to belong to a different age entirely. And the heart tree stands at the center of it, with that carved face watching everything with the particular patience of something that has outlasted every human certainty that ever passed beneath its gaze. Ned chooses this place deliberately. Cersei Lannister also chooses to come, which tells him something. That she believes, or hopes, that the Godswood operates by rules that protect candor, that what is said here carries a different weight than what is said in corridors and throne rooms and the small layered chambers of the Red Keep, where the walls themselves seem to listen. She stands across from him, and she is, in this moment, exactly what she has always been: radiant, composed, armored in her own certainty. She waits for him to speak first, which is itself a kind of move. He speaks plainly. That is always the most dangerous thing a man like Ned Stark can do, because plainness from him carries the full authority of absolute conviction. He names what Jon Arryn found. He names what the records confirm. He names what the hair color of 3 children and the consistent, patient infidelity of a marriage means for the succession of the 7 kingdoms. He names Jaime Lannister, and the name falls in the silence of the Godswood like a stone dropped into still water, sending its rings outward and outward and outward. And then he says, with a quietness that is more final than any raised voice could be, that if any harm comes to Robert or to Jon, if either of them suffers by violence or arrangement, or the particular kind of accident that befalls inconvenient men in royal courts, he will carry what he knows to every lord and every castle in Westeros, and the realm will decide what to do with it. Cersei is silent, and the silence is new. It does not have the quality of contempt or calculation. It has the quality of a person who has suddenly found themselves on ground they did not know could move. Her eyes, in the moonlight, are doing something Ned has not seen them do before. They are afraid, not of him precisely, but of the shape of a world in which she does not control the outcome. She leaves without answering, which is in itself an answer. Varys comes to him before the night is out, materializing in that particular way of his that suggests less that he has entered a room than that he has simply always been present in it. He speaks softly, with the practiced sorrow of a man delivering news he has long been carrying. Across the narrow sea, he says, Daenerys Targaryen has taken a Dothraki warlord as a husband. Khal Drogo's Khalasar numbers in the hundreds of thousands, and the girl who was sold like livestock to buy an army is, by all accounts, becoming something that was not anticipated, something harder, something that is learning, slowly and painfully, and with remarkable speed, what it means to be a Targaryen. Varys folds his hands together in the candlelight. He says that Jon Snow's true blood and Daenerys Targaryen's growing power are not separate problems. He says they are, in fact, the same problem wearing 2 different faces, approaching the realm from opposite directions. He does not finish the thought. He does not need to. Ned stares at the candle flame between them and understands, with the particular clarity of a man who has just seen the full board for the first time, that the danger was never only Cersei. The news travels from Varys's lips to Ned's mind to the throne room in a matter of hours, and in that short passage, it does not diminish. It arrives exactly as heavy as it left. Robert sits in his chair the way he always sits, too large for the space, too restless for stillness, a man shaped by war who has never quite learned what to do with peace. Jon stands nearby, and the distance between them is small enough to measure in footsteps, but carries within it the full weight of legitimacy, of paper signed and sealed, of a king's word that cannot be taken back without cost. Ned delivers the news the way Varys delivered it to him, with the careful precision of a man who understands that how a thing is said shapes what a thing becomes. Robert's reaction is immediate. It is volcanic. It is, in its way, entirely predictable. His fist comes down against the arm of the chair, and he says the word assassins before Ned has finished the sentence, and there is nothing uncertain about it. It is the reflex of a man who solved the Targaryen problem once with steel, and believes steel remains the cleanest solution. He is not wrong that it is clean. He is wrong about what it costs. Jon speaks before Ned can. This matters. If Ned speaks first, Robert hears the counsel of a friend, loyal and measured, but ultimately familiar. When Jon speaks first, Robert hears something else. He hears the voice of succession, the voice of the chair that will someday inherit everything he has built, and whether he likes it or not, whether he would admit it in the privacy of his own chest, he listens differently. Jon says that Daenerys Targaryen is his blood. He says the word aunt and lets it sit in the room like a stone dropped into still water. He does not ask Robert to feel sentiment about this. He does not invoke family as an appeal to emotion. He invokes it as a strategic fact. She is the last of a line that commands loyalty across the narrow sea, he says. She is married now to a man whose cavalry alone could swallow every army in Westeros the way the sea swallows rivers, without effort, without particular interest, without end. Sending assassins accomplishes one of two things. It fails, and it signals to Khal Drogo that Westeros fears his wife, which is an invitation. Or it succeeds, and it signs in blood a declaration of war against a Khalasar that has never been defeated in open field. He does not raise his voice. He does not need to. The logic carries itself. Robert is quiet for a long moment. He looks at Ned, and Ned gives him nothing except the steady gaze of a man who has already reached the same conclusion by a different road. Robert looks back at Jon, and something in him, some old, stubborn, once furious thing, settles. Not peacefully, but it settles. No assassins, Robert says. He says it like a concession. He says it like a man surrendering ground he is not entirely sure he should surrender, but surrendering it nonetheless, because the alternative has been made to look, in the architecture of this argument, like foolishness. He tells Ned to find someone trustworthy, someone invisible, someone who can cross the narrow sea and find a silver-haired girl in Pentos without leaving a trail that leads back to a king's solar. Not a peace treaty, not a promise, a warning. Her brother's ambitions, Robert says, will get her killed. And a letter from her nephew, whose existence she does not yet know. Jon watches the instructions being given and understands something about power in this moment. That it is not always the one who shouts who shapes the outcome. Sometimes it is the one who makes the argument so clean, so inevitable, so clearly correct that the louder man arrives at the destination and believes he has chosen it himself. The envoy will sail within the fortnight. The letter will not bear a royal seal. It will bear Jon's name alone, written in his own hand, addressed to a woman he has never met, whose grief and whose fire run in the same blood that runs in him. Approaching from opposite shores of a sea neither of them has yet crossed. Across the city, in chambers that smell of rosewater and old ambition, Cersei does not yet know the precise contents of what passed in the solar, but she knows the shape of her exclusion, the way a surgeon knows the shape of a wound, by where the pain originates, by what is tender to the touch. She sits with Joffrey, who is furious in the particular way of young men who have been made to feel small, and she speaks to him with the quiet patience of someone constructing a foundation stone by stone beneath his feet. The legitimization, she tells him, was made under duress. A king dying, a court in shock. The Faith of the Seven has views about such things, about the conditions under which declarations carry the weight of law and the conditions under which they do not. These are not new arguments. They are old ones. They require only the right voices to carry them. Joffrey listens. Around him, slowly, young lordlings are beginning to gather, knights whose futures are tied to Lannister gold and Lannister promises, men who have chosen without perhaps fully understanding the choosing, which heir they believe in. The groundwork is being laid in whispers, in feasts, in the careful cultivation of grievance. Jon's letter has not yet been written. The envoy has not yet sailed, and already the ground beneath this fragile peace is developing its first nearly invisible fracture. The fracture does not announce itself. It does not arrive with trumpets or declarations, or the clean, dramatic clarity of swords drawn in a throne room. It arrives instead in the form of a septon, an older man, soft-spoken, with the careful eyes of someone who has spent a lifetime navigating the distance between faith and power, standing before the small council and speaking in a voice of practiced humility about the conditions under which the laws of the Seven recognize a king's decree as binding. His name is Septon Reynard. He has been found, coached, and positioned with the precision of a blade placed against a throat. He does not shout. He does not accuse. He simply explains in the measured cadences of a man who believes, or has been paid to believe, that the truth requires clarification. The decree, he says, was made under duress. A king weakened by fever and wine, a northern lord present in the chambers. The faith, he continues, has precedent. There are conditions. There are questions of clarity of mind, of undue influence, of whether a declaration made in the shadow of mortality carries the same weight as one made in the full light of a king's sovereignty. He does not say the decree is invalid. He is too careful for that. He says only that it is complicated. Robert Baratheon, seated at the head of the council table, goes very still. This is the thing about Robert. He is not a subtle man, but he is not a fool either. And in this moment, he understands precisely what is happening. He understands that this septon has not arrived by accident. He understands that the southern lords who now sit back in their chairs with expressions of careful neutrality have not adopted that neutrality by accident either. He understands that somewhere in the corridors of this keep, his queen has been at work with the patience and the precision she always brings to the things she truly wants. He understands all of this in the span of a breath. His hands tighten on the arms of his chair. He does not speak immediately. The silence stretches, and in that silence, the fracture deepens. There are 5 lords present who choose this moment to voice their concerns. They are measured in their language. They speak of tradition, of the stability of the realm, of the importance of clarity in questions of succession. They do not say Joffrey's name. They do not need to. The argument speaks for itself, or rather, it has been arranged to speak for itself. Each piece placed carefully, each voice calibrated. Jon's legitimacy, they suggest, requires examination. The Great Council tradition exists precisely for moments such as this. It would be prudent. Robert calls the Great Council. He does not do it because he is persuaded. He does it because he is furious, because he sees the trap clearly enough to know that the only way through it is forward. And because he understands, with the instincts of a man who has fought his way through more battles than most men survive, that ground surrendered in retreat is rarely recaptured. If they want a great council, they will have a great council. He will bring the lords of all 7 kingdoms to King's Landing, and he will let them look at Jon Snow, and he will let them decide for themselves what they see. Jon is told in the evening, in private, by Ned Stark, who says very little because there is very little that words can adequately address. He sits with his father, and he has never stopped thinking of Ned Stark as his father, regardless of what blood dictates, in a room that feels very small against the size of what is coming. He will have weeks, perhaps a month, to meet lords he has never met, to speak to men whose allegiances are already in motion, to navigate a court that has tolerated his presence while actively resisting his reality. He nods. He does not ask if it is fair. He has grown in these months out of the habit of asking that. The weeks that follow have a particular quality, exhausting and relentless, and shot through with moments of strange, unexpected humanity. Jon meets lords in anterooms and at feast tables, and along the walk of the castle walls in the gray mornings before the court awakens. He listens more than he speaks. He asks questions and absorbs answers with a patience that some interpret as weakness, and others, more perceptive, recognize as something closer to its opposite. A lord from a reach remarks afterward, not unkindly, that the boy listens the way a man does who intends to remember. A Stormlander knight, skeptical at the outset, finds himself after an hour's conversation about the management of difficult winters, quietly reconsidering. These are not dramatic conversions. They are small adjustments, barely perceptible tilts in the angle of judgment, but they accumulate. And then there is Tyrion Lannister. He arrives at the Great Council on the day of its convening, having spent the preceding weeks in a particular kind of private consideration, the sort that Tyrion conducts in wine and silence, and in the careful review of what he has seen and measured. He has watched Jon Snow since the road south from Winterfell. He has made his assessments. He has reached his conclusions in the way he always reaches them, methodically, without sentiment, with the particular ruthlessness of a mind that refuses comfortable fictions. When his name is called, he rises, and the chamber goes quiet in the way chambers go quiet when something unexpected is about to occur. He testifies clearly. He testifies without flourish or apology. He says that Jon Snow has shown judgment, restraint, and the character of a man capable of the weight of a crown, and that in his assessment, the realm could be served by worse. He says it the way a man says something he has decided to say, regardless of consequence, and the consequence arrives almost immediately. In the face of Cersei Lannister, seated across the chamber, whose expression does not change because she has trained it never to change, but whose eyes do something that those watching her will remember. The wedge is in. House Lannister has developed its own fracture now. The verdict comes at dawn. Not because the council has worked through the night, though it has, but because there is something fitting about the hour. The way the first gray light finds the windows of the throne room and falls across the assembled lords in long pale columns, illuminating dust and the edges of armor and the careful, exhausted faces of men who have been calculating across 3 days of testimony what the rest of their lives will look like depending on how they vote. The Great Council of the 7 Kingdoms reaches its conclusion in the way all such bodies reach their conclusions. not through wisdom alone, but through the accumulated pressure of allegiance and fear, and something that only occasionally resembles principle. The North votes for Jon Snow without hesitation. This is expected. What is less expected, and what shifts something in the room when it is announced, is the weight of it, the sheer mass of territory those words represent, the cold miles stretching from the neck to the wall, the memory of Eddard Stark moving behind every word like a shadow with a sword. The Stormlands follow. Renly Baratheon, youngest of the three brothers, a man whose politics have always been more instinct than ideology, casts his support for Jon with the particular ease of someone who has decided that backing the legitimate heir is, at minimum, the more interesting gamble. He does not say this. He says instead that the law is clear and that he serves the law. No one entirely believes him, but no one needs to. The key lords of the Reach come last among the majority, and their arrival in Jon's column is the one that tightens jaws on the Lannister side of the chamber. The Tyrells do not commit fully. They are never the sort to commit fully when abstention remains an option. But enough of their bannermen ride the wind and step into the current, and the current runs toward Jon Snow. The Westerlands hold for Joffrey. The Crownland houses most deeply bound to Lannister gold hold for Joffrey. The vote, when it is tallied, is not a close thing. It is a majority. It is a legal confirmation, binding under the precedent of councils past, endorsed by the Citadel's representative, sealed by the Grand Maester before the sun has fully cleared the horizon. Jon Snow is Crown Prince of the Seven Kingdoms, affirmed by the Lords of the Realm, recognized by the institutions of law and succession. Robert Baratheon set in motion. Cersei does not react. This has already been established. What she does instead is something quieter and more consequential. She rises, offers the council the precise degree of courtesy that cannot be faulted, and withdraws. The legal avenue has closed. She has known for a day that it would close. She has not been waiting for the verdict. She has been waiting for it to be made official, because official verdicts are the ones that transform private plans into necessary actions. The letter to Casterly Rock was written 2 nights ago. It requires only the final word, a single line added in her own hand, in the cipher her father taught her when she was still young enough to find such things romantic rather than essential. She adds it, she seals it, she gives it to a rider who is not Lannister in name or livery, and who leaves the city by the river gate before the council's announcement has reached the streets. Tywin Lannister will receive her words before the week is out. He will understand them without requiring explanation. He will begin moving the pieces he has already positioned, because Tywin Lannister does not wait for permission to act. He waits only for justification, and she has given him one. The protection of Lannister interests in a realm where their chosen heir has been set aside. It is the kind of justification that sounds almost reasonable until you count the swords behind it. What moves next does so on its own momentum. Robert Baratheon rides out from the city on the second day after the council. His purpose: the announcement of the verdict to the people of King's Landing and the surrounding lordships. A ceremonial progress, a king among his subjects. The kind of visible kingship Robert has always understood better than the administrative kind. He's in high spirits. The council has confirmed what he always knew was right, and rightness suits Robert like wine. It makes him loud and expansive, and, on this particular morning, insufficiently attentive to the mood of the horse beneath him. There is no Lancel serving watered wine on this ride. There is no conspiracy of small cups and careful dosages. There is only a king who has not slept enough, who is heavier than he was the last time he rode seriously, on a road still slick from an overnight rain, coming down a hill too fast, because he has never come down any hill at the pace it deserved. The horse shies. Robert does not recover. He is brought back to the Red Keep on a litter, which is the same as being carried back as something already half concluded. The Maester's work for 3 days. He is conscious in pieces, enough to ask for Jon, enough to grip a hand, enough to say things that are later reported in fragments by those present, none of whom fully agree on the words, only on the tone of them, which was, by all accounts, the tone of a man who knows what is coming and has finally stopped arguing with it. On the morning of the 4th day, Robert Baratheon, first of his name, dies in the bed he never liked sleeping in the castle he never loved, having done the one thing that might redeem or damn everything. Jon Snow is king, and somewhere on the western road, riders move through the mountain passes in Lannister colors, carrying orders no council has sanctioned. Jon Snow is king. The words travel faster than any raven, faster than any rider, spreading outward from the Red Keep in whispers, and then declarations, and then the kind of settled fact that reshapes the world around itself simply by existing. He does not ask for the throne. He never has. But the throne does not concern itself with what men ask for. The ceremony is deliberate in every detail, and deliberateness is itself a message. The great sept of Baelor fills with lords and ladies who have spent days calculating what their presence means and what their absence would cost, and nearly all of them decide that presence is the safer wager. The candles are lit, the incense rises, and Jon Snow walks the long aisle not in Baratheon gold and not in stark gray, but in something between: dark wool, clean lines, the clothing of a man who has decided that what he wears should announce nothing except that he has arrived. The High Septon performs the blessing with all the ritual weight his office carries, but beside the crystal and the consecrated oil, there is a branch from a heart tree, carried south from Winterfell at Ned Stark's quiet instruction, its pale wood and red-veined leaves entirely out of place in this marble hall and entirely deliberately present. Jon invokes both the old gods and the new. He does not do this to placate anyone. He does it because it is true. Because the realm he is being asked to govern contains multitudes that a single prayer cannot hold. The circlet placed upon his head is iron, not gold. The choice is noted by every lord present, interpreted differently by each of them, and Jon makes no effort to clarify. Some read humility, some read severity, some read the north. All of them are partially right, which is perhaps the most honest any symbol can ever be. He speaks briefly. He says he rules for the realm entire, not for a house, not for a bloodline, not for the debt his name carries, or the debt it does not. The realm entire. The words land quietly in the high-ceilinged space and then settle, the way stones settle at the bottom of deep water. He does not smile. He does not need to. Cersei's attempt to reach Casterly Rock is elegant in conception and poor in execution, which is perhaps her truest epitaph as a strategist. She moves fast. She takes her children and a small trusted escort, and she moves for the King's Road before the news of Jon's naming has fully hardened into law, as though speed alone might outrun legitimacy. It does not. Ned Stark's men are already positioned, not because Ned anticipated this exact flight, but because Ned Stark has spent decades understanding that the gap between a threat and its execution is where preparation lives. The riders intercept the Lannister column in the gray morning light on a stretch of road that offers no advantage to either side. There is a moment. Hands tighten on reins. The children are very still. Jon's instruction, when it arrives, is not what Cersei expected. She is not arrested. She is not executed. Her children are separated from her gently and escorted to Dragonstone, not a dungeon, not a cell, but an island keep with sea wind and cold stone, and enough distance from King's Landing to render them politically inert, safe, watched, removed. Joffrey's fury at this is real and immediate, and changes nothing. Myrcella is quiet and observant in a way that will matter later. Tommen asks if there are cats on Dragonstone. There are not. Someone promises to find him one. Cersei herself is escorted west, to Casterly Rock, to her father. The message is contained in the geography itself. Jon does not destroy her. He returns her, and in returning her, he makes her Tywin's problem and Tywin's responsibility. What Tywin does with that is something Jon is already thinking about, already calculating, the way a general thinks about terrain he has not yet crossed. The riders who accompany Cersei are courteous. They are also extremely thorough. She does not send a raven. She does not stop unexpectedly. She arrives at Casterly Rock exactly when Jon's accounting says she should. Tywin receives her in the Great Hall. His face is, by all reports, unreadable. He dismisses the escort. He pours no wine. He asks one question, and whatever she answers, he does not respond to it for a long time. Jon's first act with the full weight of the crown behind it is not a feast or a pardon or a consolidation of alliances. It is ravens, dozens of them, dark shapes lifting from the Red Keep's towers in the early morning, carrying a single demand to every lord in Westeros. The wall is real. The threat beyond it is real. Every house will contribute men to the Night's Watch, proportional to its size, without exception and without delay. This is not a request framed as a command. It is simply a command. Ned Stark is named Regent and Protector of the Realm to govern the South, while Jon attends to the North. Ned accepts this, as he accepts most things, not with enthusiasm, but with the settled recognition of a man who understands that duty is not optional simply because it is heavy. Jon himself is already thinking about horses, about the King's Road North, about how long it takes a king to ride from King's Landing to Castle Black, and what he will find waiting there when he arrives. The preparations are beginning. The orders are going out. And in the rookery, one raven has not yet been sent. The one addressed to a name most lords would not recognize, written in Jon's own careful hand, describing something seen beyond the wall that cannot be explained by politics or precedent or anything a king's council was built to comprehend. The raven to the north goes first. Then the ravens to the lords of the Reach, the Vale, the Stormlands, each one carrying the weight of a throne recently settled and a king who has not yet slept more than 4 hours in a single night. But before those ravens clear the walls of King's Landing, before the ink has fully dried on the orders flowing from the Tower of the Hand, there is news from the west. Tywin Lannister has moved. He does not send a raven to explain himself. He does not ask permission. He simply moves, as Tywin has always moved, with the quiet certainty of a man who has never truly believed that any other person on the board possesses the authority to constrain him. His armies march east from Casterly Rock and from the Golden Tooth, banners bright against the gray of early morning, the Lannister lion snapping in cold river wind. The Riverlands feel the weight of those boots before any messenger can ride ahead to announce them. This is how Tywin has always operated, not through declaration, but through presence, not through threat, but through the accomplished fact of 20,000 soldiers already positioned where you did not want them to be. Robb Stark rides south at almost exactly the same moment. The timing is not coincidence. Robb has been watching the western roads since the first word of Lannister movement reached Winterfell, and he rides with the northern banners unfurled and the full authority of his Lord Father, now expressed differently. Not as the liege lord of the North acting alone, but as the kinsman of a king, the cousin of the man who sits the Iron Throne, lending the full martial weight of the North to a crown that shares his blood. There is something different in Robb's bearing now, something that was not there when he rode south the first time, in that other telling, in the history that did not happen. He is not riding to war out of grief and vengeance. He rides with purpose that is colder and cleaner than that. He rides because Jon is king, and the king needs this done. They converge in the Riverlands, the two forces moving toward each other like tides, and what happens there is brutal in the way that winter is brutal. Not chaotic, not theatrical, but relentless. Lannister outriders find Stark vanguards on narrow roads between flooded fields. There are skirmishes. There is blood. There are ravens sent and not answered, and the slow grinding logic of two large armies attempting to assert dominance over the same territory begins its ugly work. Jon does not march with Robb. This is the calculation that matters most, the move that most observers would not expect from a young king still finding the weight of his crown. Jon remains in King's Landing. He sits in the Tower of the Hand, not because he is afraid of battle. Every man who has seen him fight knows better. But because he understands something that took Robb Stark years of war to learn and cost him everything before it finally settled into certainty. The battle that ends this is not the one fought with swords. He sends Tyrion. The choice itself is a message, not a general, not a knight, not a herald with a formal declaration. He sends the man who is Tywin Lannister's son, who carries the Lannister name and has spent a lifetime learning how his father thinks, learning the specific architecture of a mind that has never once in 60 years prioritized anything above legacy. Jon's letter to Tyrion is brief. He does not finish outlining the full parameters of the offer in writing. He does not need to. He trusts Tyrion to understand the shape of what is being offered and to find within that shape the words that will retch his father where no other words can. Tyrion rides west on a gray horse with a small escort and the particular composure of a man who has been underestimated by the world so long that being underestimated has become a form of armor. He arrives at the Lannister camp as the afternoon light goes flat and gold across the river, and the guards who admit him are young enough that they do not entirely understand what they are witnessing. The hand of the king arriving at his father's tent, the offer folded inside his coat, the weight of the entire Western War balanced on a conversation between two people who have spent most of their shared life failing to speak honestly to each other. What Tyrion offers his father is this: every Lannister land, every Lannister title, every stone of Casterly Rock, and every gold coin beneath it. all of it remains untouched. The house survives. The legacy survives. Tywin Lannister bends the knee to Jon Snow, and in doing so, loses nothing that cannot be regained through time and patience and the natural accumulation of Lannister influence over a new king's reign. The alternative is stated plainly, not as a threat exactly, more as a mathematical certainty. Any further aggression, any continuation of this march, and Casterly Rock will be stripped from House Lannister in its entirety, not burned, not salted. Simply given to another house, quietly, permanently, in the manner of a king who has the legal authority and the military support to do exactly that. Tywin is silent for a long time after Tyrion finishes speaking. He stands at the entrance to his tent, one hand resting on the tent pole, looking out over the camp where his soldiers are cooking their evening fires and sharpening their swords and doing all the 1,000 ordinary things soldiers do in the hours before a battle that may now not come. His face reveals nothing. It never does. But his hand tightens once on the pole, then releases. He asks a single question. What becomes of his grandchildren? Tyrion answers without hesitation. Joffrey and his siblings retain their titles. They will live as lords. They will have lands and income and all the ordinary dignities of Westerosi nobility. They will not have the throne, and they will not press claim to it, but they will not be erased. Jon has promised this, and Jon, Tyrion tells his father quietly, keeps his promises in a way that Cersei never understood, and Joffrey was never capable of. Another silence, longer this time. Then Tywin Lannister turns back inside his tent and sits down at his field table and looks at the maps spread across it for a long moment. All the roads marked, all the river crossings, all the careful strategic positioning he has spent 3 weeks orchestrating. He looks at it the way a craftsman looks at a piece of work he will now set down unfinished. Not without feeling, but with the controlled, deliberate decision of a man who has always known that emotion is a tool, not a master. He agrees. The terms are drafted by candlelight, Tyrion writing in his careful hand while his father watches. The Lannister armies will halt their advance. Tywin will travel to King's Landing within a fortnight to formally submit to the crown. In exchange, the settlement is exactly what was offered. Nothing taken, nothing burned, legacy intact. It is, by any honest accounting, more than Tywin deserves. It is also, by the same honest accounting, exactly what Jon needs. The West secured, the Riverlands spared further destruction, and a man of Tywin's political weight, now technically sworn to a throne that has just demonstrated it can outmaneuver him without drawing a sword. This is what power looks like when it is wielded by someone who understands it. Far across the narrow sea, in a city that smells of salt and spice and the lingering smoke of old fires, Daenerys Targaryen receives Jon's envoy in the early hours of morning, when the light comes sideways through high stone windows and turns the room a shade of amber that looks almost like dragonfire if you let yourself see it that way. She reads the letter once, then again. She sets it down on the table beside her and looks at nothing in particular for a long moment while the envoy stands waiting and the 2 dragons still in Meereen shift restlessly somewhere in the distance, their presence a low vibration in the stone of the building itself. She had been preparing. The ships were nearly ready. The arguments for invasion had been refined and rehearsed until they felt less like ambition and more like destiny. She had been telling herself the story that conquerors always tell, that the crossing is necessary, that the claim is righteous, that what waits on the other side of the narrow sea is hers by blood and by right and by the simple mathematics of fire and will. The letter changes the mathematics. She does not send an army. She does not send dragons in the way she had imagined, not as weapons, not as instruments of conquest, but as something older and stranger and more true. She sends a single ship to Dragonstone, the island where her family's story began, the castle that remembers Targaryen names in every stone. And on that ship, in a specially constructed enclosure of iron and dark wood, she places one of the newly hatched dragons, small still, barely the size of a large dog, but already showing the particular restlessness of a creature that will one day reshape the world. With the dragon, she sends a letter. It is addressed not to the King of the Seven Kingdoms, but simply to Jon. It is not long. It says, among other things, that she has spent years believing she was the last of her family, and that she has now learned this is not true, and that she does not know yet what that means for either of them. But she knows this: the last Targaryens will not burn each other's kingdoms. Whatever comes next between them, it will not begin with fire. The ship leaves port on a gray morning, the dragon's low sounds audible even over the waves. In King's Landing, Jon receives word of the Lannister settlement and reads Tyrion's account of the meeting with his father in the particular silence of a man who had wagered a great deal on a single quiet calculation and is now absorbing the fact that it worked. He sets the report aside and looks out the window of the Hand's Tower, where the city stretches away toward the bay in all its complicated, human, ordinary chaos. Merchants and beggars and children running between carts, the whole roaring, indifferent life of a capital city continuing under a new king's banner, as it has always continued under every banner before him. He allows himself, for exactly a moment, something close to relief. Then the second raven arrives, not from Tyrion, not from Robb in the Riverlands, from Dragonstone, from the harbor master reporting a Myrinese vessel sighted in the channel, approaching under a flag of parley. And something in the hold, the message says haltingly, that is making sounds the crew cannot identify, sounds that the harbor master, a practical man with 30 years of maritime experience, describes as unlike anything he has heard before. Jon reads the message twice. He folds it slowly. He is already thinking about what it means, not just politically, not just dynastically, but in the way of a man who sent a raven once to a name most people would not recognize, describing something beyond the wall that could not be explained by politics or precedent. He is thinking about the world as it actually is, not as the game boards of lords and kings have always insisted it must be. A dragon is coming to Dragonstone, and the dead are still moving in the far north. And Jon Snow, King of the Seven Kingdoms, stands in a tower in King's Landing and understands with sudden, clear, absolute certainty that the war he has been fighting is not the one that matters most. He moves quickly after that. The raven to Dragonstone goes out before dawn, and the order to march goes out before noon, and the army that had only just begun to breathe after the capital's long political siege finds itself turning north with the grim, purposeful efficiency of men who have been told, plainly and without ornament, that the world requires one more thing of them. Jon does not dress it in grand language when he addresses the assembled lords. He does not need to. He simply tells them what he has seen beyond the wall, what he has always known in the oldest part of himself. and he watches their faces shift from reluctant obligation to something older and more serious than political loyalty. Fear is a kind of clarity, and the men who march north with him carry that clarity like a lantern in both hands. 10,000 strong, they come from every corner of the realm. Lannister Gold marches beside Stark Grey, Tully Blue alongside Tyrell Rose, Baratheon Stag and remnants of the Night's Watch Black. That thin and weathered brotherhood who have kept the watch alone for so long, that reinforcement feels, to the older rangers, almost like a dream they are afraid to trust. Castle Black receives them in the manner of a fortress that has long since stopped expecting salvation, with silence, and then with something that is not quite joy, but is the next nearest thing to it. The gates open, the torches are lit, and the wall itself, that impossible ancient spine of ice rising 700 feet into the pale northern sky, seems to loom larger once there are enough men beneath it to finally understand the scale of what it was built to hold back. Jon walks the top of the wall the evening before the assault begins. He walks it alone, or nearly so, Ghost moving at his side like a white shadow against the gray stone. And he looks north into the darkness that spreads beyond the tree line without end. He has looked north his entire life, in one way or another, as a boy at Winterfell, wondering at the men who rode to the Black, as a steward and then a ranger, learning the cold weight of what lived beyond. Now he looks north as a king, with 10,000 souls at his back and a Valyrian steel blade at his hip, taken from the Stark armory with Sansa's quiet blessing. And the looking feels different, not easier, but right, in the way that only true purposes ever feel right, like something that was always going to happen, arriving at last. The assault comes before dawn. It comes with cold that moves ahead of it, like a living thing, pressing through every gap in armor and stone, and it comes with silence first, and then sound. A sound that is not sound so much as the absence of it replaced with something older. The dead do not shout. The walkers do not announce themselves. They simply arrive at the tree line in numbers that make even seasoned commanders go still. And then they begin to move forward, and the wall blazes with fire and desperation, and the sharp, bright discipline of men who have decided they will not give ground. The line holds. It holds for hours, grinding and terrible. The combined army of the Seven Kingdoms pressed to the edge of what men can endure, and then past it into something beyond endurance that is only will. And then Ghost moves. No order is given. Jon does not command it. The direwolf simply turns from his master's side and runs east along the base of the wall with a speed that seems impossible in the cold, and 300 mounted riders who have been waiting behind the eastern gate follow him without fully understanding why, following the white shape through the dark because something in their bones insists it is right. The hidden pass opens ahead of them, a narrow throat in the ice that no map shows because it predates the men who made maps. Ghost finds it as if he has always known where it was. The flanking strike breaks through the walker formation at its thinnest seam, scattering the dead in waves, and Jon is already moving down from the wall before the gap fully opens, moving toward the figure at the center of all of it. The Night King stands apart from his army in the manner of a general who has never had reason to fear a battle. He watches Jon come with eyes that are older than the wall, older than the language of kings, and something in those eyes, if what they contain can be called that, seems to register the blade before it registers the man. The fight is brief, as the greatest fights always are. Jon does not win through strength alone, or skill alone, or even the Valyrian steel that parts walker armor like smoke. He wins because he has spent his entire life walking toward this moment without knowing it, and the accumulated weight of all those years arrives with him in that last step forward, and the blade finds the Night King at the precise instant between one breath and the next. The dead fall silent, not gradually. All at once across the entire north, as if a hand has been lifted from a terrible instrument, the sound simply stops. The whites collapse where they stand, the cold recedes, and on the wall, as the first gray edge of dawn begins to separate sky from ice, the soldiers of every house stand looking at each other across a silence that none of them have words for yet. Stark and Lannister, Tully and Tyrell, Baratheon and Night's Watch Black, bloodied, exhausted, alive. Their grievances feel in this light like objects found in another man's pocket, real once perhaps, but no longer quite belonging to anyone present. They stand together on the wall as the sun comes up, and no one speaks, and no one needs to. Ghost returns to Jon's side as the light strengthens, pressing his great head against Jon's hand, and Jon stands with his hand in the direwolf's fur and looks south for a long moment. South, where a Myronese ship sits in the channel off Dragonstone with something in its hold. South, where the realm he has spent everything to hold together waits to see what kind of king survives a war like this. He does not look north again. That door at last is closed. But the ship at Dragonstone concerns him deeply. The ship at Dragonstone does not trouble him for long. It troubles him for precisely as long as it should, which is to say it troubles him through the cold weeks of its investigation, through the careful interrogation of its Myronese captain, through the quiet discovery that its hold contains neither weapon, nor army, nor hidden claimant to any throne, but simply grain and dye and bolts of eastern silk, the ordinary cargo of a merchant who heard that the Seven Kingdoms had survived their long war and judged correctly that survivors tend to need things. The realm is hungry. The realm is cold. The realm will trade. Jon signs the agreement himself and does not make it into a ceremony, because some things are better settled quietly, without the weight of occasion pressing down on them. A year passes, the way years pass after great costs have been paid. Slowly at first, and then, without anyone quite noticing the change, with something approaching ease. The roads are repaired. The harvests come back. In the Riverlands, where the war before the war had left its long gray scar, there are new structures rising beside the old ruins, and the people who build them are not all the same people who lost what came before, but they are people nonetheless, and they work with the particular determination of those who understand in their bones that the alternative to building is simply not building, and that not building is no kind of life at all. Jon rides back into King's Landing on a morning in late autumn, when the light comes in low and golden over the black water, and the city smells of bread and river water, and the particular human warmth of too many people living close together. The streets are lined with them. Word traveled ahead, the way it always does, faster than horses, carried in the mouths of riders and merchants and fishermen and small folk who had relatives in the next town and the next. They know his name. They know more than his name. They know the stories, not the story of a bastard boy who never wanted the crown, not the story of a reluctant king who might have stayed safe in his castle and chosen not to, but the story of a man who rode north when the cold came, who stood on the wall when the dead walked, who held the realm together not by wanting power, but by understanding at the deepest possible level what power was actually for. That story has passed through enough hands now that it belongs to all of them, which is exactly where stories like that need to be. He rides through the gates, and Ned Stark is there. White-haired now, white as the weirwood bark, and straight-backed in the way that some men are who have learned that the spine's job is not merely to hold the body upright, but to hold something else as well, something less physical and more essential. He is not young. He may not have many winters left, but he stands at that gate with the stillness of a man who has arrived, finally and without reservation, at something he had been walking toward for a very long time. He kneels. Jon watches him kneel and does not immediately speak, because the moment asks something more than speech. Ned calls him Your Grace, says it plainly, says it without grief. And that is the thing. That is the thing that Jon will remember, that he says it without grief, that for the first time in all the years they have circled this question between them, the old man's eyes are simply clear. The weight he carried, the secret that bent him, the promise he kept at such enormous cost, all of it has resolved into something simpler. He kneels before a king. He kneels before a nephew. He kneels before the son of two people he loved who became, somehow, despite everything, despite the war and the dead and the terrible cost, exactly what the realm needed. He does not finish the words. He does not need to. Jon reaches down and takes his arm and raises him, and they stand together at the gates of King's Landing, and the crowd is very loud, and neither of them hears much of it. The great council that follows is not a dramatic thing. Great councils rarely are when they work. It is quiet and methodical, and sometimes contentious, and frequently tedious, the way that all genuinely useful governance tends to be. The lords of the great houses come. The faith sends its voice. The Night's Watch sends its new Lord Commander, a Tully man who had survived the wall and had the look of someone who had seen enough to last him permanently. They argue over language. They argue over precedent. They produce, after many days, a document that defines clearly how power passes, how disputes are adjudicated, how the crown and the houses and the faith hold each other in a balance that no single ambition can simply tip over. It will not prevent all future conflict. Nothing prevents all future conflict. But it changes the shape of conflict, shifts it from battlefields to councils, from swords to arguments, and arguments, whatever else they are, tend to leave fewer orphans. Jon signs it last, as is customary, and sets the seal, and the assembled lords of Westeros witness it, and the thing is done. He goes to the Godswood alone that evening. The heart tree stands where he had it placed, 5 years prior, transplanted from a cutting taken from the Winterfell weirwood, with more care than the masters thought strictly necessary, and more ceremony than they could formally justify. It has grown. Its roots have found the earth beneath the Red Keep's stone and found purchase there, the way living things do when they are given the smallest possible opening, the faintest margin of possibility. The carved face in its bark is old, or looks old, the way all weirwood faces look, as if they were old before the first man ever thought to put a name to age. The red sap runs in the dim light like something that is not quite blood, but is not quite not. Jon kneels before it on the cold earth. He speaks quietly. He speaks to Lyanna first, because he has been thinking about her for a long time, And because some debts cannot be settled any other way than by saying the name of the one to whom they are owed, he tells her that the realm is whole. He tells her it came at great cost. He tells her that he understands, as much as any man can understand a thing he was not present for, why she chose as she chose, why she burned, why she made Ned carry what she gave him to carry. He does not tell her he forgives her, because that is not the right word for what he feels. The right word is closer to something like gratitude, which is not simple and is not painless, but is real. He speaks to Rhaegar, who gave him the blood that put him on this road, who loved a woman into a war and left behind a boy who would spend his whole life learning what his father never got the chance to become. He speaks to Robert, who roared through life like a man who knew he was fire and had decided to burn fully rather than carefully, who named him Heir and set all of it in motion, who deserved better than what his grief made of him, and who, at the end of some accounting, Jon does not pretend to fully understand, gave the realm something it needed more than it needed a comfortable king. He speaks to the names the war has taken, speaks them slowly because the dead deserve to be named, and the king who does not know his dead does not fully know what he is protecting. Ghost comes to him before he rises. The great white wolf crosses the godswood on silent paws and presses against Jon's side in the old way, the way he has pressed since the night they found him in the snow, motherless and small, one of a litter of the impossible. Jon puts his hand in the deep fur and feels the warmth there, the steady living warmth of a creature who has survived everything alongside him, and who requires nothing in exchange for this presence except presence in return. The red eyes catch the moonlight. The godswood is very still. Jon rises. He stands for a moment longer beneath the weirwood, breathing the night air of King's Landing, which is not clean air in the way that northern air is clean, but which is the air of a city alive with all the ordinary noise and mess of people living their lives, arguing with their neighbors, burning their fires, feeding their children, reaching toward tomorrow with the particular stubborn optimism of those who have outlasted the worst that came for them. He breathes it in. The long night is somewhere behind him now, a door closed and latched, and the world on this side of it is not perfect and will not stay still and will require everything of him still, as the world always requires everything. But it is whole. The realm is whole. The dawn he had held the wall to protect is simply without ceremony the sky above his head. Jon Baratheon, once Jon Snow, once the boy no one had wanted to be king, stands in the godswood of the Red Keep with his hand in his wolf's fur and understands, quietly and completely, that it was enough, that it was more than enough, that the name his father gave him and the blood his mother passed to him and the crown a dying king pressed upon him had all arrived, by the long and costly road they had traveled, exactly where they needed to arrive, and that the realm sleeping around him in the autumn dark is the answer to every question the war had asked, and that the answer is alive and warm and real. And this brings us to the end of this alternate history. If you enjoyed exploring how events might have unfolded differently, I'd really appreciate it if you subscribed to the channel. We dive into new stories from the world of Westeros every single day, imagining the choices, battles, alliances, and destinies that could have completely changed the fate of the Seven Kingdoms. I'd also love to hear your thoughts. What do you think would have happened next? Did this version of history end better than the original? Or would you have taken the story in a completely different direction? Leave your ideas in the comments, because many of the best future stories come directly from your suggestions. Thank you so much for watching and for spending your time with me. I'll see you tomorrow with another alternate history from Westeros. Until then, peace out.